I mean, I guess that was funny. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein last week quoting Donald Trump, the same president who's waged a near constant war on his own Justice Department and on the rule of law. Rosenstein gave his official resignation letter to the president last night, concluding his 2-year tenure in the Trump administration. While his resignation was expected after the release of Robert Mueller's report, Rosenstein's warm embrace of Trump on his way out, not necessarily. In his resignation letter, Rosenstein writes, quote, "As I submit my resignation effective on May 11th, so he's not gone yet, I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to serve, for the courtesy and humor you often display in our personal conversations, and for the goals you set in your inaugural address: patriotism, unity, safety, education, and prosperity. Because a nation exists to serve its citizens." But let's not forget, Trump has attacked Rosenstein many times on Twitter, including one instance where he called for his own Deputy Attorney General's imprisonment. Joining Frank and the rest of the table, A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor for Real Clear Politics. I mean, he quotes Donald Trump on the rule of law. Nobody thinks Donald Trump believes in or is an advocate for the rule of law, except it would appear today the Deputy Attorney General, who former acting FBI director, describes this way. Rod shifted his gaze as he leaned back in his chair. I could see that he was not looking directly at me. His eyes were focused on a point in space a few yards beyond and behind toward the door. He was a little glassy-eyed. He started talking about the firing of Comey. There was emotion in his voice. He was obviously upset. I think there are 3 reported incidents that he was crying, and that's fine. I love a man who can cry. But the idea that this man who brought him to tears over and over and over again has as his Deputy Attorney General somebody whose last act is to be a human shield for Bill Barr, put his finger on the scale in a way that Mueller would not, and then send a letter saying he was funny. What?
Yeah, I mean, I will never understand this concept of how you can show such loyalty and such, saying such glowing things in a letter to somebody who so publicly was so vicious and so publicly attacked you. I don't fundamentally understand that. I mean, look, I think we can all recognize that Rod Rosenstein was in perhaps the most untenable situation that any dad could find himself in, right? I mean, this is an unwinnable situation. The ending to all of this raises a lot of questions, and I think he's going to have to answer a lot of those questions when he is inevitably called to testify in front of Congress.
Let me just flip the script, because I agree with you, and I was one of those people who thought he was in an untenable position, and then when he went before Congress to testify in front of Donald Trump's lemmings on the then Republican-led House Intel Committee, we celebrated his seeming courage. He has his signature on one of the FISA applications that Donald Trump still tweets about. So I guess I don't mean to sort of push back against your assessment, because you're better informed about the pressures that someone like Rod Rosenstein would be under. But what explains the zigzag?
Yeah, I don't know that we have an explanation for that, because I think you're exactly right. For every sort of one act that you think, wow, you're really speaking truth to power here, then you have the Comey memo. So I think it's sort of a back and forth. I think this is somebody who, clearly, like I said, was in a tricky situation. I think we have to give him that credit point, but made a lot of really questionable decisions. And at the end, I think his legacy is kind of up in the air on all of this. I mean, I think seeing how sort of, we wanted to post him up as like, you let the Mueller investigation continue, right? You protected that. Mm-hmm. That was important. Mm-hmm. But then how it all played out in the end, like I said, just raises a lot of questions.
Frank.
Stockholm Syndrome. Hostage negotiators will tell you they study this phenomenon of people who are held captive and abused, where they start aligning their thoughts and start agreeing with their captors. And it looks a lot like Rod Rosenstein. I think he's got Stockholm Syndrome. I think he's been beaten and abused, and he's essentially given up. There's a best case scenario here where he's simply trying to restore the public's trust and confidence in the Department of Justice by saying these glowing things about the Attorney General and the President and how great his tenure has been and how safer America is. The problem with that is by trying to restore the public trust, he's actually diluting the public, because he can't defend with any data what he's saying in his resignation letter. He's saying that elections are more secure, yet we have a president and an attorney general who are trying to walk away from the concept of our elections having been threatened by the Russians. He's talking about how the public knows even more than ever now about the foreign threat and cyber threat, and yes, that's true, but again, we have an administration that seems not to be doing anything about it. He says the Department of Justice was unbiased, objective fact finders And again, nothing that we're seeing in the behavior of this Attorney General is objective or unbiased at all. So historical fiction is what we're seeing in his resignation letter. And I don't know where he's going, but we're going to see him testifying on the Hill, and he's going to look like a deer in the headlights.
So the president that he quoted, AB, on the rule of law, it was one of his last public events. He could have quoted anybody, a dead president, a founding father. He quoted Donald Trump on the rule